Cool. So recording is started. Let's see. We've got, make sure I have the agenda up. So I think from last week, we still had some outstanding discussion to have on network policy moving to GA. Tim, I see you're here. Sorry, 2 weeks ago. You said that you might get David Oppenheimer on the call.
I have David here. Hold on, I'm just setting up my Zoom a little bit. Crank up the volume. David is here, although he's off the camera. Or I think the camera's off anyway. Yeah, so let's talk about this selectors stuff. Where do we start?
Well, it sounds like there is a desire to be able to select more finely grained across namespace boundaries than network policy does today. And there have been a couple proposals on how to do that in the mailing list. And also some prior art, I think, in this area in terms of selecting namespaces for pod anti-affinities and affinities.
Right.
Yeah. So
whether it's prior or not is kind of debatable, but some contemporary art. But
right.
Yeah.
Some form of art.
To set the context, so my understanding is that the current network policy, you can specify a namespace or a namespace selector or a pod selector that is in the same namespace. Is that the idea?
That's correct.
Yep.
Though we did discuss, but opted not to do until we had a stronger use case, other namespace plus other pod selector. It seems like a reasonably obvious extension.
Yes.
So then I guess the question is, like, should we try to standardize on namespace selector plus pod selector as the mechanism across our APIs? I mean, obviously I have a bias towards namespace selector because I think it's a more natural way to express things. There's been some reasonable debate about whether namespace selectors are multi-tenant safe or not, but
right.
I think that is tractable. I think that there's been a couple of ways to think about that proposed.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's reasonable. I hadn't really given a lot of thought to the multi-tenancy issues, and it sounded like people did have some concerns in that thread, but I think it's a reasonable way to standardize on.
Okay.
Yes.
So for GAing network policy, should we just stay as we are and then extend to namespace plus pods and know that the affinity can deprecate the namespace name and bring in namespace plus pods? Is that fair?
I think so. I mean, I think
okay.
That's fine. We'll have to find someone to do that work. But yes. And then the beta deprecation policy is what you have to keep it there for how long?
One overlapping release.
Just one. Okay.
Yes. It's looser than you think it is.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, cool. So for the network policy side, then let's go GA with what we have, and then we can add the conjunction of namespace plus pod. But I would rather not change too much until we hit that GA line. Objection?
Yeah. I agree. Agree with that plan.
All right.
I guess none of the people who are objecting to that are on the VC, so good luck to that.
All right, well, we'll write that down as plan of record, and we'll see if anybody gives any last hollers about it, but I think that sounds good. You're welcome to stay if you want to, or you're welcome to leave if you feel like it.
I'll see how interesting your meeting is. I will judge you. So.
Oh, thanks, David.
Yes.
All right, Casey.
Great. Yeah, so the next thing on the list was cloud provider node addresses. There's a question about external and internal IPs.
That was me.
Right.
And I was just wondering if there's actually any definition anywhere of what external and internal, node external IP and node internal IP were. I couldn't really find any in the API doc. And I did look into what GCE, AWS, OpenStack, etc. seem to do. and vSphere seems to do something completely opposite. And the reason we ran into this was because somebody was trying to stand up OpenShift with vSphere, and it got all kinds of weird node addresses out of it. So in my review, it seems like vSphere is not doing the right thing, but since there's no definition of what these should be, it's not surprising, I guess.
So can you tell what does vSphere do? Like how? Yep. I think the interpretation of those names is pretty obvious. So what are they doing? How do they choose to interpret it that doesn't make?
Yeah. So first, what they do is they actually appear to have an agent inside the guest that scrapes all addresses from all network interfaces inside the guest, including like Docker 0 and any other virtual interfaces that might be created, as well as the actual interface that gets outside of the guest. And that's problem number one. Second is they add all the IPv6 addresses too. But the third problem is they mark all of those addresses, I think, as internal IP, which is clearly not correct because according to GCE and AWS, internal IP still means that it's the address a node can talk to another node on, not the address inside that particular node, if you understand what I mean.
Yeah.
So as far as I'm aware, internal IP and external IP both mean addresses outside of the node itself that the node is addressable on, whereas an external IP is an internet public address that you can reach the node on. vSphere is treating internal IP as stuff inside the VM that may or may not actually be accessible from anywhere outside of the node. And then external IP is a selected network that may or may not be public, if that makes sense.
That is, I guess, a reasonable interpretation. What did you do the spelunking while you were digging into that of where those are all used? I don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah, I didn't look inside of like Kubelet and everywhere else itself to figure out exactly what they were used for. I know what they're used for in OpenShift, and that's why I was getting screwed up because we're expecting the kind of the addresses where you can actually talk to the node from outside the node, and obviously that was not the case with vSphere. So, I mean, I guess what I was wondering about was, is the GCE and AWS definition of these types what Kubernetes wants them to be, and thus vSphere is wrong, and vSphere should be updated, or what? I mean, it just seems like we need some consistency here, and to write that down somewhere would be good.
I think it seems reasonable if we were to document it sort of as you described it, addresses by which this VM is reachable.
Okay.
Internal being non-public and external being public, but I don't like the breakdown of that because it's a little too Boolean. That said, that ship may have already sailed and maybe we shouldn't sort of redesign that.
Yeah, the public one is a little bit, it's like, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, at least for AWS and GCE, that's actually defined in like the API. The way that the cloud providers get those particular addresses and assign external IP is from technically internet public addresses, from what I can.
Yes, the choice of words here is probably not ideal, but I think that's a separate issue than the fact that vSphere is not doing the same as the other providers.
Right.
I think that the right thing to do, I guess, would be to document what you described. Internal is and external is, and send either PR or file an issue against the vSphere folks.
Yep. Yeah, I did file an issue against vSphere folks detailing some of this, but I assume another issue to actually update the API documentation to clarify this would be the next step.
Yeah. That would be great. Can you file that PR or file the issue?
I certainly can. Well, I'll just file a PR with my suggested text.
Okay. I'm not sure which file that goes in, but I'm sure you'll find it.
Okay. Sounds good.
Cool.
That's it for that, unless anybody else has comments on cloud providers.
One very brief one. I can just give a bit of background. That external internal IP stuff actually I assume came from AWS, which I assume GCE ended up copying and
I think that's right, Quentin.
I was the person responsible for those terms in AWS, and it was just because we didn't know what we were doing, and each VM got one of each of them, and that was that, and we gave them those names. So there's nothing magical or special or correct about them. It's just the names AWS has that everybody else has kind of copied, I assume.
Okay, thanks for the background.
Great. So next thing on the agenda is IPv6. Is there someone on the call who wanted to introduce us to that?
Yeah, that was me. In the first item, I just wanted to describe a problem that I'm seeing and see if anybody has any clever ideas on how to solve it or fix it. But what I'm seeing is that there's a hairpin mode that's used on when there's a bridge, a virtual bridge that's being used by the network interface, and Kubelet is turning on hairpin mode, and this is disrupting IPv6. It's causing a race condition so that most of the time a pod comes up and IPv6 is dead in the water. And this hairpin mode feature was added about a year and a half ago, and I guess it was added so that a pod can access a service using its service IP for a service that it's serving itself, and so the access packets go out and they get reflected back to the pod. The problem with v6 is that when hairpin mode is on, it reflects everything. It reflects every packet, including the packets used for IPv6 duplicate address detection. So there's neighbors solicit messages that go out and get reflected back like 100 microseconds later, and the pod declares those to be duplicate, and that fails 3 times, and then you're dead in the water. So I don't know.
Quick question on that. Sure. Do you require duplicate address detection to work for what you're working on, or are you more or less assigning IP addresses from some other controller?
Well, if we're going to be running in dual stack mode, then I think that the v6 address selections will ensure that everything is unique. If we're running v6 only, well, I guess with v6 only we'd be assigning round robin. So.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to get at is if the IPAM for v6 is heavily managed by the orchestration infrastructure or by the network plugin, and you can guarantee that network management, whatever it is, will not assign duplicates, you might be able to just turn off v6 duplicate address detection through syscontrols and ignore the problem. But that said, that might run afoul of IPv6 standards. And it might not work for all cases, especially if you want to do something like link local, right. I think.
Do we believe that the hairpin behavior that you're observing is correct, or is that a bug in something?
The question is, do I believe it's correct? I think it's a solution to a problem for a pod trying to access its own service. But
sorry. You're right in your assertion that that's what hairpin mode is for, but why is v6 returning all packets?
Yeah, I think hairpin mode is supposed to be the packet is allowed to go out and then immediately not back in, not the packet will always go out and then immediately back in.
Well, I'm definitely seeing reflections. I see at the VETH, I'm seeing a copy of the neighbor solicit that comes back 100 microseconds later.
I'm not sure he's saying all packets come back. Neighbors solicit, is that some kind of broadcast?
It's a multicast. It's a multicast.
That's the issue.
I'm sorry, what's that?
Yeah, I think that is the issue. I think because it's a multicast, I think that's the reason it's recognizing. If it is a unicast packet, even if you send it back to it, it will not be, it will not reach the stack because of the MAC address filtering.
I see. That is interesting.
So I'm a little surprised that the querier doesn't recognize that the solicitation is from its own MAC address and say, oh yeah, that's me.
Is it getting mangled by IP tables somehow and coming back with a different MAC?
No, it's coming back exactly as is, and I think it's just in the v6 standard that, at the time that this first solicitation goes out, the node doesn't own an IPv6 address, and I guess it owns its MAC at that point, but it can't distinguish whether it sent that message out or someone else has sent it to it.
It can't distinguish by its own MAC address?
Yeah, the source MAC for the packet should be the same as the V that sent it out.
Right. So if there was a way to detect that and drop the packet, look at the MAC address and say, is this my MAC address? Then that would.
Yeah, I guess I would think that the kernel would do that for you automatically. But maybe there's something that's preventing it from doing that.
Or the code is just never run in an environment where its duplicate address detection packets get reflected back at it, and so nobody thought of it.
True.
Yeah, I mean, that would be my guess. Given
I know this had been a problem in OpenStack back a couple of years ago. They had a similar problem, and they were able to solve the problem by filtering the reflected solicits, IPv6 solicits in libvirt.
Yeah, I mean, we can probably do something like that at the bridge. I mean, we already do some workarounds for this in v4 with promiscuous mode. Probably do something similar. But before we do that, I would really like to understand whether the kernel people who own these drivers feel like this is correct behavior. Like, it seems to me like it's probably exactly what whoever was just speaking before said. Like, it's just never been run in that combination of features. And if you presented it to the upstream kernel folks, they'd probably say, oh, that's stupid. We should filter our own MAC address.
I mean, that said, that if that's the case, that doesn't help most people until they upgrade kernels. And
that's true, but at least we know whether we have a workaround for a short-term thing or whether we're doing something dumb, right? That's my biggest fear, because I'm dumb and I don't want people to know it. So does that does that give you an action plan? Like, do you want to draft a note to the Linux kernel mailing list or Linux net mailing list and figure out, or I can actually.
Why don't I take an action item to ask some of our our IPv6 stack people?
That's great.
That'd be a lot
that'd be great.
If net dev.
But I think this is within the IPv6 standard that if it sees a reflection, that it's got to treat that as a duplicate.
Okay, Dan and I will independently consult our kernel team and see if we can find some consensus on whether this is something dumb or whether we should find some other way of expressing what we need to express or something.
Okay, sounds good.
I don't think about there may be enough uniqueness in the addresses we're assigning that we can just turn off duplicate address detection. But if we ever want to do anything like Slack or any automatic address generation, then this is gonna come back to haunt us.
Can I ask for one thing though? Could you get a TCP dump of the packet going out and the one coming back that causes the problem, and just drop that onto the SIGNet mailing list for me?
Yeah, we'll do.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Cool, thanks. That's a fun bug.
Yeah. once you understand it, it was.
I bet that took you a while to figure out.
Yeah, it was. I had no idea why it was dropping it. The reflections are hard to see unless you look in the right spot.
Let me address, I guess, the other half of this. Most installations we suggest don't run in hairpin mode because there's some other bugs in kernel that cause ref counts to get lost with hairpin mode. We instead added this promiscuous bridge mode, which we, like on GKE, we use, and I think it's the default in Kubernetes. That doesn't have the same deadlocks in the kernel. I wonder if it shows you the same problem you're having here.
I did try it in that mode, and I saw the same thing. And I was seeing when I looked at the hairpin mode setting on that VTH interface, it was still being set in that promiscuous mode. I don't know why, but
action item.
Yeah, it surprised me. I if someone can double check, but I ran kubelet in that mode with in promiscuous mode, and I was still, when I looked at the hairpin mode setting, the flags it was set to 1.
Okay, that shouldn't be, I think, right? Minhan will take a look.
Yeah,
he's all over that code.
but yeah, if I set it to none, then obviously everything works flawlessly. So
except for a service to be able to access itself.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So I think we're done with that, right? This first
Yep.
item. Then
Any other topics?
Go.
I think you had a second bit about IPAM, right?
Yeah. And this is just I don't want to spend too much time on this, but this was in a review comment, whether the configuration for the host local IPAM should have one IPAM section with both v4 and v6 combined, or an IPAM, a separate IPAM for v4 and an IPAM 6 for v6. And if anyone has opinions, they can look at that review.
I've got a few. I think that maybe we should just punt that over to CNI, and we can talk about it there. I think that we probably want to do that for the moment for backward compatibility reasons. But I think also in the future, what we're trying to do with CNI is break the IPAM stuff out of the individual plugins and make them essentially their own top-level plugins, which could include running more than one for the same pod if you're using a config list. So I think there's a couple of issues there that should be discussed.
Awesome. Okay. Look forward to your comments. Thanks.
Cool. And I saw one other comment from Clayton on one of the first PRs about the bit masks that we use for v4 allocation for services, which is concerned when we get to the place where we're doing v6 for services. When we allocate a service IP, we literally keep an uncompressed bitmap in etcd, which is fine because most service ranges are like a /16 or smaller, and will not probably be so fine with v6. Right.
Yeah. So we had some discussions here about whether we should limit the range of the service and IPs in general. You know, do we limit the subnet that's assigned to a node to /64 and so on, because it does blow up objects in memory if your ranges are big, as they can be with v6.
Yeah. I don't have an answer for what the right thing to do is, but that was an interesting consideration that I hadn't thought of before.
Yeah.
Storing 8K in etcd is not too big a deal. Taking 2 to the 64th, 2 to the, I guess if you have 8 bits, so 2 to the 56 bytes, probably not going to fly.
Right.
All right.
Cool.
Thanks, guys. So next topic was release mechanics. Who added this guy to the agenda?
Yeah, so this is Bowie. I added it. This is just sort of last 1.6 release. We had a large number of flakes, which then needed to be closed kind of expediently. And then the other thing that came up was with the CNI compatibility issue. It was kind of sort of a scramble towards the end to get all the external plugin authors, basically to figure out the fix and then to kind of propagate out into the community. So this was, to bring this up, basically for the 1.7 release, I don't know what kind of planning we're going to do, if the planning doc is being constructed right now, but it would be good to basically, if you have a third-party plugin, to have an owner or like basically just a list of that the release manager could potentially ping or keep in the loop when the release is going. And then as part of the release planning for 1.7, we should figure out what kind of management we're going to deal with flakes. So I don't know what you guys think about that.
So it seemed like the flakes got closed and triaged fairly well in the last release after the calls went out. Was that not the case?
Well, it kind of ended up happening sort of last minute.
Yeah.
Whereas it ideally shouldn't be. It should be a continual thing rather than. Basically, it was like, oh, the release is coming. Oh, let's go look at them.
Right. So, I mean, should we just emphasize and start doing flake triage a lot earlier in the cycle? Is that part of the solution?
Yes, and one other interesting thing would be to figure out some owners for the tests and sort of make that very apparent, I guess. So if you see a flake, even if it's not yours, you could say, figure out someone to talk to about it, right? It might not be something that you would know.
I was gonna ask if it would make sense to have a kind of flake owner who's responsible for rallying troops throughout the release cycle as needed,
Yeah,
and reporting on that.
It was underneath my desk, but it's not mine. I figured it was yours.
We could cycle that around for each release cycle unless somebody really wants to step up to be that person always.
Yeah, I mean, so how do you guys want to move this forward? Like, we could have a volunteer or just start up a document for the 1.7, because I think we need to start planning that anyways, right? Okay, so I think probably move the discussion towards the 1.7 release doc, and so who's going to pick up creating that thing initially?
Volunteers?
I mean, I can do it if you guys don't mind.
This is a SIG Network specific 1.7 release doc.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll take that as an action item then.
Okay.
Can you also add a link to release schedule or else the current dates to that for the doc, just so that everybody has an easy link to figure out when the deadlines are?
Yeah, I will, put the schedule on there, and then basically just a skeleton. You guys will all fill it in, and hopefully we'll have a discussion probably next time.
So in a similar vein to this, right, you brought up the kind of CNI scramble at the end, which kind of highlighted to me that there's no in-tree end-to-end testing of CNI. Is that something? Sorry.
Well, I was going to say we do sort of have it for KubeNet, but we don't have any blessed plugins essentially that aren't KubeNet, that are straight up CNI. So that's probably the next step, is to figure out, what kind of plugin, whether it's an existing third-party one or whether it's a dummy plugin, would be used for some sort of test for the CNI driver.
We could, one option we could do would be to run E2Es with this in driver mode CNI, but with the bridge driver. So we would change the underlying net behavior, but we would exercise the CNI path. But I'm not sure that would have caught this.
No, it probably wouldn't have caught it, because we did update all of the first-party CNI plugins, including Bridge, as part of that CNI release to deal with this problem. So it wouldn't have caught, Calico, Weave, whatever else.
There was a second issue, I think, where pods were getting started before any CNI config was installed, which came prior to the third-party plugin issue,
right.
And
that would have caught that issue.
Yeah, it seems like there needs to be introduced in the release process some, I don't know how you call it, like a drop to the third party to kind of then signal that, hey, this release is coming. You guys probably need to figure out what to do to consume it. I don't know. There is no formalized process right now. Someone correct me.
There is no process.
Okay, so I will add that to the doc for 1.7, and then we can kind of hash out the details of what that would look like.
Yeah, I know the KubeADM guys are planning on and may have already added some in-tree testing of third-party CNI plugins for the KubeADM ETs.
We also, I mean, we should fix up our test EDEs so that they either run both KubeNet and CNI Bridge, or that they only run CNI Bridge. We need to figure this out. I mean, we know we want to get rid of KubeNet in the medium term anyway, right? The question I have, I guess, is who's going to drive that, and who, and like we double our test load. Does that mean we have one extra test suite? So what is the actual fix?
I think
I mean, I feel like we probably would want to do both KubeNet and CNI Bridge in the near term. Maybe the CNI Bridge test can be targeted instead of duplicating the entire KubeNet suite.
Okay, Minan, go.
Yeah, what if we ran another suite within the node E2E? Like, because it doesn't require a whole cluster, and then node E2E already run like 8 versions, right?
Okay.
And then one version can be with the CNI network plugin with the bridge plugin or something simple, and then on a single node.
That's not a terrible idea.
Yeah,
that's a pretty great idea, actually. Can you?
Yeah, I can start with that.
All right, Minhan's going to scope that out and figure out what work is needed here. This is a place where somebody can step up and help. All right. Somebody taking a shower? Quentin? All right. Who's up? What's the next topic?
Next topic is kubeproxy.
So I added this item. So it's mainly for getting feedback regarding the next steps for kubeproxy. So the near term is to like improve and stabilize the performance-related problems with IP tables kubeproxy, and then get it like in a stable state. And then the long term is that because we get a lot of like other alternative like IPVS and BPS and other implementation of kubeproxy. And then I guess it's time to like somehow make it easier to implement and integrate other kubeproxy implementations. And then, and then I'm just listing ideas out there and then try to get some feedbacks and stir the discussions.
So one thing I noticed the other day was that there is some interplay between kubelet and the proxy in terms of IP tables rules. So it might be good to try to separate some of that. If we do end up moving host ports into CNI and out of kubelet itself, then we might run into some issues with rule compatibility between IP tables proxy and
what interplay are you seeing between kubeproxy and kubelet?
I believe they jump to each other's rules. I could be wrong. But
Yeah, I think you're right, Tim.
Firewall and there's the kubemark mask stuff.
Yeah, okay, so
that kind of thing.
So we intentionally, the kubemark mask and the kubemark drop, Minhan added those because we wanted to use them in both places. We just said, like, let's just make them a utility that kubelet offers. These rules exist. Anybody can jump to them. They're part of kubelet. They don't do anything on their own, and they're not called on their own, but they're available. Now, if we move host ports to CNI, or when we move host ports to CNI, obviously that's not going to fly because it can't make that same assumption, right?
Right. Yeah, I think that's more what I'm getting at.
Yeah. Okay. I buy that. I was curious if you found any other places, because there shouldn't be any other cross dependencies.
I don't think so. I think it's just those two.
So on IP kubeproxy rather, I've spent some time the last week. I had a couple of patches that were sort of pending that I polished off to get in to make the rate limited IP tables restore run. So I've got one PR that's merged today, one PR that's open still that needs to be rebased. And then I will have one more on top of that that will add the rate limited IP table run. So that means at the end of that, you can call IP table, you can call sync proxy rules as often as you want, and it will only run at a max frequency, and it will accumulate all the deltas in between.
Nice. Do you need review on those at all, Tim, or are you good?
There's one that I need to rebase and get ready for review that I could totally use a review on. I think I maybe even tagged you on it already.
Okay.
And then the second one is not written yet. Well, it's written, but I have to rebase on top of this. So
did you label them with area kube proxy?
Probably didn't.
Okay, I'll go find them.
Yeah, thanks. So I think that'll alleviate one of the big IP tables performance issues. I know that Quinton's here, and I know that he has a thread going about his IPVS-based implementation. I haven't actually looked at it in great detail yet, but it sounded promising. So I have a question now for the folks who are actively maintaining kube proxy, which is not me. Do we want to keep extending kube proxy with new proxy modes? Or do we think at some point we want to say, like, you know what, just make a different program that does the IP, like just pick on the IPVS one, right? Maybe it should just be a different service configurator. The name kube proxy is a misnomer anyway. This is an open question. There's low cost to adding new proxy modes, and it's nice because it's already part of the core distribution. It has the downside of, once we add a few more, we basically have no grounds on which to say no to anybody. There's already 3 modes. There's already the Windows one, which you could argue should have been a separate program.
My feeling is that if we do some of the stuff in the longer term, that would make it easier to have separate implementations and not keep piling them into kube proxy itself.
If you do what stuff in the longer term? Sorry.
Things in terms of documenting exactly what kube proxy is supposed to do and having some compatibility stuff.
Yeah, I would, not really a counterpoint, but it would be ideal. Like I see kube proxy has 2 major pieces. There's one that kind of consumes the kube API and then sort of tells you what the services you want to set up is. And then there's another one that uses the system primitives such as IP tables or IPVS to sort of instantiate those services. And it would be good that the first piece is kind of common as much as possible to avoid sort of like reinventing the wheel there.
I mean, that could be library-ified.
Yeah, definitely.
What it sounds like is there's a discussion to be had, and we basically have multiple choice proposals. So it'd be good to share a doc, put the proposals out there, and then kind of understand what the trade-offs are.
Yeah, I don't think there's any urgency to it.
Yeah.
It's not on fire. And adding, if the IPVS one works and it fits as another proxy mode, I don't think that's particularly egregious. But eventually we'll have like the BPF implementation, and the BPF implementation is very different, as I understand. And what happens when network vendors want to do entirely different implementations? Do we absorb them into us and put ourselves in between the developers of a particular mode? Like concretely, whenever the Windows guys want to change the Windows proxy mode, they have to send a PR and one of us has to approve it.
Yeah.
Right? And none of us are equipped to review those, so we just rubber stamp it. So what's the point, right?
Well, and some of the network plugins already have their own kube proxy re-implementations, don't they?
Yes, at least the Contrail folks do. I don't know who else does. Or they used to.
We do as well. Condio has this one.
Condio has their own too. So there's already some people who are doing their own thing, right? Which is fine. I think in the limit, I think that's probably the right thing to do, is to have small single-purpose configurators that use the particular configuration mode that they want to use. I'm not sure we're there yet. We don't really have a notion of a Kubernetes distribution, right? Like a lot of people still depend on upstream having everything.
I was just wondering, hello? I was just wondering, and I don't, like Tim, I don't think I have a strong opinion either way at this point. I was just wondering, I mean, we have to ship the default Kubernetes with a default, whatever we call this thing, which, de facto, I guess, is kube proxy configured as using IP tables at the moment. And maybe, I'm speculating now, but maybe IPVS is like strictly better than that, just like, maybe IP tables was mostly better than the proxy mode, and we add these, what we consider core modes to some default thing, which currently is called a kube proxy. And maybe outside of that, if your implementation is a bit more esoteric or doesn't run on all environments or whatever the case may be, then you do what people are already doing, which is to build their own kube proxy. And maybe we can sort of make the gap between those two a little bit smaller by creating this library that you're talking about, which does the interaction with the APIs. Also, just to put it in perspective, I think the code we wrote for IPVS is like 680 lines of code or something in 12,000 lines of kubeproxy. So, it's a very small percentage, and that's the stuff that does all the rule manipulation and, or rather, whatever, hash table manipulation, IPVS. So, yeah, I mean, to force people to write or maintain or, do something with 12,000 lines of code to add 600 lines of code to it seems not like the generally good solution.
Yeah, that's a pretty, I like that argument, Quentin. I like the idea that we do have to ship a default, and today the default is the IP tables one. I think we can modulo review and everything, but I think we can make a reasonable argument that IPVS is pervasive enough and enabled in pretty much every kernel that it could be the default.
Have we been able to figure out solutions for the port ranges and the other issue that IPVS had? Which I
No. So those are great points, Dan. The two issues that I know of with IPVS are it doesn't have any expression of ranges. So if we were to ever add port ranges to kubeproxy, which has been asked for many times, then IPVS can't do it. And IPVS in direct return mode can't do port remapping, obviously. But I think we could live with the idea that if you do port remapping, then you don't get direct return mode. And if you do, direct pass-through ports, then you can get direct return mode if your environment supports it. But ranges is a real thing that we should think about.
I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure I understand ranges. I mean, at least if there's not mapping involved, port ranges can just be passed through without anything?
I don't know if there's a way to do whole IP pass-through on IPVS. I think it wants to listen on a specific port and forward to that specific port, not receive that whole IP. I could be wrong on this because I mostly played with it in masquerade mode, not direct mode. But then beyond that, you could imagine that people only want to accept ports 1,000 to 2,000 and not pass through anything else.
I'm sorry, I know less than you about this.
I think my colleague Michael might be on the call, and he's actually the one who did the hard work. I was just the pretty face at the presentation. Michael, are you here?
Typical.
Yes, I'm here. Yeah. So I think I agree with you guys. We actually use NAT mode, which is about port remapping, but the port range is actually one open issue.
Okay. And my understanding of IPVS is it's very old established technology that would probably would not be met well with requests for change. I don't think we could twist the upstream kernel's arms to add ranges.
Well, who knows, right?
I mean, I guess we'll never know unless we try, but IPVS has been around for 15 years, right? So
they just 2 years ago switched to, anyways.
Anyway, possibly. But I guess we'll consider that.
Something that crossed my mind for this particular one, and I'm not an IPVS expert, but if you just brute forced it, given that it is not subject to the same problems with the number of rules as things like IP tables, is it possible to just brute force ranges by just putting 65,000 IPVS entries in?
Oh, Quentin.
Yeah.
No. I mean, it's an honest question. It might be completely ridiculous, but our statistics, our analysis, if we did it right, was that in fact, it's like a millisecond or so for these updates, and it doesn't affect throughput of the data plane or throughput of the rule updates. So, I don't know. It sounds ugly, but it might just work. And given that we haven't actually offered this thing anyway, it's perhaps a backdoor, and until we find a better solution, it might just work.
Well, and the truth is we don't have ranges yet anyway, right? It's been asked for frequently, but it could be something that we have conditions on, right?
That was essentially my point. It's not like that door is completely shut. We may have a back door where it can kind of work with maybe some caveats. but we don't even have support for it anywhere yet. So maybe we shouldn't worry too much about it.
Yeah. Or maybe this has become some hybrid, like if you specify a range, then you fall into the IP tables mode, but otherwise you can use the IPVS mode.
Yeah, both sound reasonable.
All right. Well, these are areas for exploration then. Your PR, your code for the IPVS thing is in my queue, and I will make time to look at it, if for no other reason than satisfaction of my curiosity.
Oh, there isn't any code there yet, so you don't even have to worry about that.
I thought you linked to a GitHub repo. Maybe I'm wrong.
Not that I'm aware of.
I added some links to that section. There were some existing IPVS kube proxy implementation efforts and PRs, and I linked to at least 2 of those.
Well, come on, Quentin, pony up the code.
Speak to Michael.
So actually I want to know what's the history of those PRs, because they have been sitting there for quite a while. Was there any issue like functionality was it wasn't work, or any other issue like blocking?
I don't think there was any issue. I just think nobody got to reviewing them because we're all doing something else. But if people are actively pushing on it, then we'll get to the review.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Sure. Yeah. We'll try to push a more clean code, and hopefully it will get through.
All right.
So the PR link that's there is like the really old one, and then there's another presentation there. I see that Huawei just kind of presented about an IPVS proxy for Cube. I'm not sure if there's code out there about that, but just another effort to note.
Yeah, that's the same thing we're talking about. So that was Michael and my.
Oh, okay. All right, good. There you go.
And for what it's worth, I think the Docker Swarm implementation uses IPVS too, so we're not alone in that.
Yep.
Yeah, it does. There was also another really good presentation by the guys from Comcast, who've built all of their internal load balancing for their video delivery system on the back of IPVS, and they had nothing but good things to say about it. So if nothing else, we're not alone.
I mean, the truth of the matter is the only reason I didn't use IPVS for the implementation initially was because I didn't really know it existed until I had just about finished the IP tables version.
Sounds familiar. I think I've been in exactly the same position as you before.
Okay. Other topics? I have one if we run out.
There is one more topic right now on the list, which is next steps for multi-network.
So I added that one, and I mean, we can, if there's anything to actually discuss that we think we could reasonably do in 9 minutes, then we could. Otherwise, we can just keep punting back to the comments in the doc and the mailing list. I feel like we're getting pretty close.
Yeah, I would think that's probably best continued on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can give a quick update. Basically, I'm coding-wise, I've taken care of the API changes. I'm working on the kubelet side changes. We can talk about this one particular item that you've listed then. Basically, the host accessible field, I've kept it because I couldn't find an alternative for, to signal this to kubelet that a particular network is accessible for it to do something like health checks or liveness checks. Or for that matter, any host-based tool that wants to access the pod, it needs to know which of the network it can access. So ideally, if the network plugin had a way to signal this back to kubelet, that would have been ideal, so that we don't have to configure this in the network spec. But in the absence of that, I don't see any other way to do this.
Okay, thanks for the update on that. Maybe we should think about and figure out if there's a way to get that back. Maybe that includes enhancing CNI in some way.
Yeah, but I don't know that we can rely fully on CNI either, because theoretically we have to support other drivers as well. So yeah, but I mean, something we can look into. I had another question in terms of logistics. So I did read the development guide, and it does say that APIs have to be pushed as a separate commit. So does it mean that I should generate 2 separate PRs, one for the API part and another for the kubelet?
Yes, well, probably. There's actually, we're working on a API process for
Okay.
community. That the PR for that is, I think, approved, but maybe not merged yet. That would lay out like a template doc that's free to fill in about what is your API, what are the reasons for it, what are the criteria for moving between alpha, beta, those sorts of things. That I would love to make this be the first thing to consider.
Okay, so could you send me a link to that PR?
Yep, I will do.
Do we have a an actual proposals PR for this yet?
We don't.
And,
We just
and
have
should
Google
the
Docs.
first steps?
Yeah,
I mean,
think
so
the right thing to do, Casey, you're right. Joji, I think the right thing to do is to file a proposal PR first and make sure we get this discussion there.
And I mean, before we do the proposal PR, we should probably come to consensus in the document, the Google Doc proposal, and create a PR proposal off of that.
Yeah.
Okay. We
I
can
think
do
there's,
that. So
there's
I
still
will
some
try
discussion
to.
to
I know
have.
that. Yeah, there are like a bunch of questions. I will get to those, and I think Dan, you're also helping answer some of the questions, and we'll try to close them down, and then once maybe by the next meeting we can get it to the proposal PR. So sound good?
Yeah, maybe we can make that the primary topic of the next meeting.
Okay.
It keeps getting punted off, but I'd rather get it out of the way. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So I have one more small thing I'd like to throw out. We hit a bug recently with the way Kubelet does host ports, which was we use the IP table. So we're using IP tables to do host ports. And we use the adder type local as the key for whether it was a host port. But it turns out that that overlaps with the way kubeproxy does node ports. And so if depending on which order your rules were installed, you would get different results. And if you had a service that used port X and a pod that also used port X, like for example 443, you would get different results depending on which order the rules were installed in. I wrote up a PR that isn't yet merged and I'm not super happy with, but I wanted to put it out for people to think about. The PR that I wrote says, instead of using adder type local, which says basically anything that can resolve as a local address, I explicitly went through all of the local interfaces and made a separate rule for each interface that was not a loopback and not a link local. And that allows me to avoid overlapping with things like the load balancer IPs that are in use. And I didn't have a better answer, and I still don't have a better answer. And I made this comment on the CNI PR for host ports also, but there hasn't really been any chatter on it. So I wanted to see if, in the last 3 minutes, if anybody wants to find a better answer.
I guess without seeing the PR, I'm probably not fully understanding what the implications are. So
okay.
Maybe push the PR.
Yeah, I'd like to take a look at that.
It's open by me. You can buy PRs. I don't have that many open.
Okay.
And it's there. I'm not, like I said, I'm not real happy with it, but I don't have a better way to express what I'm trying to express. And maybe I'm trying to express it wrongly. Like maybe we actually need to think more about whether those semantics actually do overlap and the problem.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, and maybe this isn't related at all, but whenever I see somebody iterating all the interfaces on the host, that gives me a little bit of pause.
I felt squicky writing it too.
Okay.
That said, I wrote it as resiliently as I could think, but I still felt icky doing it. All right, so anybody who's got free time, please take a look at that one.
I was wondering about the topic of the multi-networking. This is also something that we have some interest from our customers to support multi-networking. And I went through George's presentation document, which is basically based on the idea of defining some logical network objects in Kubernetes.
Yes.
So as an alternative, I wanted to get some feedback in terms of what if we do this outside Kubernetes as in the form of a wrapper that basically supports multiple CNI plugins simultaneously. That's something that we did as a prototype and we are working on right now. I wanted to get some time for the next meeting to share that with the SIG Network.
So we're out of time for today, but I think if we make the multi-network the primary topic for 2 weeks from today, then we can talk about it then. Is that fair?
Yeah, let's do that.
I'm afraid we lost the last 10, 15 seconds.
We'll at the next meeting in 2 weeks, that will be the #1 topic.
Yeah, that was actually discussed quite extensively in Berlin as well. I sat in on the SIG networking, and there was quite a lot of, I think, Mike, you were there as well.
Yeah, I don't think we got into what Karun is trying to bring up, though. So maybe if you want a particular discussion on that particular idea, you might raise it as a separate. I'm still working on catching up. I mean, there's so much chatter that's been on this topic. I don't know if maybe someone wants to try to write a consolidated, taking everything into account. Here's what we currently think. That might make it for a lot of other people to get into this.
Yeah, I think that Joji's doc, once it gets updated with the current state of the world, is probably the most concise explanation of that at the moment, at least of that proposal.
Maybe Joji can spend a little bit of time. Pardon me for signing you up for work, Joji. Maybe you can spend a little time to put an executive summary at the head of that doc.
Yeah, I will do that. I'll do that. So lately there have been a few questions I've not been able to catch up. With busy with other stuff, but I will do that. Definitely will do that this week.
Great. All right, so we meet again in 2 weeks?
Indeed. I will likely be absent for that because I'm going to be on vacation.
I'm happy to lead that one then.
Perfect.
Cool. Thanks, Dan.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.